right. So on our last session, which was the live panel discussion, we started bringing in comments and questions from the audience, even with that. So these two are just kind of blend together a little bit, and that's okay. That's okay. We want to have as much interaction with everyone attending the conference as possible, and leverage everyone's respective areas of expertise with looking at different parts of this whole constellation of goals and objectives and challenges and opportunities to get more information and insights out of our cardiac arrest data. And so Tom, something I would like to try to start off this part of our conversation with is perhaps a little bit of discussion about your workflow. So one of the challenges that I had when I was doing these analyses is the time interval from when a case was managed until I actually got that post-event feedback report back to the crews. Obviously, the sooner we can do that, the more information recall the crew will have about their behaviors. So how long does that typically take you, and describe a little bit about the workflow that results in that time frame?
Right. Honestly, I think it also kind of depends on where you are in your journey and how long ago you've implemented high performance CPR, let's say, or maybe you've implemented mechanical chest compression device and you're monitoring application times. I think anytime when you're trying to make a change, I think in one of your last presentations, you're saying you're trying to introduce a special cause variation. You're trying to change your organization's behavior. It's more important that you follow up the training with close monitoring and rapid feedback until the change is made. I do think you can then start to hit a maintenance phase where the feedback can be not as timely, maybe not 100% of the time. Like, we are far more likely to review a bystander witness shockable cardiac arrest on Hilton Head Island than, say, something that maybe even shouldn't have been worked, the 90-year-old Parkinsonian patient at the memory care center, but no one knew the code status. Things of that nature are a lower priority for us to review. And I think now that we're more checklist driven, I usually am getting a text message when we get ROSC, either from the battalion chief from the field or something like that. So a lot of times I'm aware of these situations in real time. And so we're to the point now where, like, I'm going to get to the office the next day and my phone's going to ring and it's going to be the crew wanting to know, have you heard anything about the patient we brought in last night? And so in those situations, I will generally call up the analytics and things because I like to be able to speak intelligently about it. So if it was if we had, and I also pulled the 911 tape and listened to it. I may not know the analytics yet. I may not know the TCPR performance benchmarks. I may not be paying strict attention to the CPR fraction time or the perishock pauses. I'm just getting an overview of the whole case. So I would say at this point, we're in more of a maintenance phase where I'm not as uptight about having a structured, I never like calling them report cards, a CPR performance feedback form of some kind. I don't know how much the crew's really related to that. But in the very beginning, when we were having issues with 30-second pauses where people were intubating or something like that, they were necessary. But I think at this point, the entire organization understands exactly what they are supposed to be doing. And because we have a supervisor at the scene and it's kind of ingrained into our DNA, most of those things are being corrected in real time using crew resource management at the scene. And if something does go wrong, a lot of times they will call and self-report and just say, hey, we kind of screwed something up yesterday. Would you mind putting a set of eyes on this and giving your feedback? Obviously, I would give more attention to something like that if they're asking for the feedback. But to be honest, at this point, we don't automatically review all of our cardiac arrest calls anymore.
No, I think that's an interesting point. it's a reflection of a mature system. If this is actually relating to a different conference you and I did last week, Tom, with the special cause and common cause variation, the one we did for the American College of Cardiology. But nonetheless, we'll bridge the two topics here. So once you've implemented your improvement project change, so in this case, maybe it's like you were talking about crew resource management on a cardiac arrest scene, you go through that transition phase. That's when you're really on it, trying to give lots of feedback as quickly as possible to help everybody get up on that new plateau. But once you're on that plateau and things are performing relatively well, then it sounds like you're doing more elective sampling of cases just to make sure that, you know, everything's staying on the rails, things are performing normally, et cetera. But that's one of the things is I think your system is a little bit more mature than a lot of other systems. Dr. Jarvis, could you comment maybe about how often you end up doing the cardiac arrest case reviews? Is it all the cases? And how quickly does it get back to the crews that were on the case?
So we still do 100% of them. We review every cardiac arrest and every intubation. But we actually have staff in our office, and that's primarily what they do. So we will generate a CPR report card. Sorry, Tom, you need to come up with a better acronym. We need something pithy here, buddy. So for lack of a better term, that feedback device. And we generate that and get it out to our crews. Now, in terms of timeliness, this is one more thing I'm going to blame on COVID. We were on the ball for quite a while. We were abstracting so if we say the compression fraction on this call is, 89, 90%, then that piece of information would come out and we would add that to our database. That part we've gotten behind on. So we're not as good as getting it abstracted and into our database as we need to, and we're not as quick getting it turned around to our crews as we once were. So those are our things that we need to focus on right now.
Joseph Zalkin had commented about, trying to get this stuff in there and celebrating your wins, which I think is a valid point. But I guess I'm a little bit curious about the workflow again. I remember seeing a presentation from the folks up in King County, Seattle area. And gosh, I'm trying to remember the guy's name, Dana somebody. Tom, you probably know the name I'm reaching for. But one of the things that I picked up from a talk or a conversation, maybe it was with Dana, is that they had mentioned a workflow where there's a crew within their system that gets alerted when a cardiac arrest is being managed in their system. And what it allows them to do is when the crew that actually worked the arrest was finished with the case, they would go ahead and upload it to somewhere. I don't know if it was, with just a cloud storage device or something. But anyway, it would go up into a cloud storage capacity. And then this particular crew, I guess it was at a slower station, they had the responsibility that shift for then downloading it, running the analysis, and they were able to get that feedback report to the crews sometimes within a couple hours or maybe even less after the case was completed, which was amazing to me because I was struggling to get it done within days, trying to run down the crew if they didn't get the data extracted out of their defibrillator and then chasing down the monitor and just all sorts of misadventures that I'm unfortunately I think too many people on this video conference can relate to, trying to get that done. So being able to do that within hours I thought was extraordinary. And Joseph seemed to be talking about something similar where he has his advanced practice paramedics doing this within a matter of hours. Jeff, is getting it done within a couple hours something that you think is worth the extra effort, or is it okay if it's a couple days later?
Were you asking me or Joseph?
Well, Joseph isn't on the line. I've been hoping Joseph would kind of jump in and join us here, but I'm calling you out, Joseph.
Come on, Jay-Z, accept the invitation. Yeah, I think that the more rapid the feedback, the better. But again, this is one of those situations where I don't want to let perfection be the enemy of good enough. You may not have the ability to get it turned around on that shift. I would say that if it's been, probably more than a week and a half, 2 weeks, there's not much point in doing it.
Yeah, you'll get the numbers to add into your aggregate database, but the feedback to the individual crew loses a lot of value. John, looking at this from an educator perspective, so we're trying to change behavior here with these feedback reports. How much of a factor is time? So you're looking at this through a different lens. You're looking at this through the lens of an educator, and if you're trying to influence my behavior, how long is practical and necessary, or is it like Jeff was talking about, perfection getting in the way of good?
Well, perfection can get in the way of good, but in reality, from an educator's perspective, it's really important that the medic and EMT, the crew, get feedback as quickly as possible. By the next shift, at least in my opinion, is adequate. I do agree that if you go much longer than 2 or 3 shifts, you're now a week and a half out. They've had other calls. The value can drop drastically. So I'm of the ilk that the sooner you can get the information and the sooner you can sit down with the crew, the more of an educational experience the crew will have, and the less it will be a disciplinary discussion, although we try not to make them those. But the further out you go, when you start bringing up calls that happened 3 weeks ago, a month ago, 6 months ago, the crew doesn't feel the same as the next shift where you say, hey, let's talk about the call you had last shift, kind of thing. So from an educator perspective, I think next shift, when you're working 24, 48, it's probably the longest it should go. Now that's understanding that operations has their needs and their time constraints. But from an educator's perspective, that's the way I see it.
No, I appreciate that, John. So, Joseph?
Yes, sir.
Can you talk a little bit about this workflow that you mentioned in the comments?
Well, we think timing's important. And given that typically nights has a little more time on their hands, and the same consistent group of APPs review the data and craft it ready to be sent up to QI, in an ideal situation, you'd have an event occur on a Monday, and if the crew was returning on Tuesday, they'd have feedback available to them. And some PCR systems give you that if the patient was the discharge information associated with the patient. At Wake, they try to use the dispatch to discharge data set so that every player has, a component of that. These are complicated systems. They don't own their dispatch system, but the data systems for EMD with a quality assurance person in the 911 center, they have responsibilities to review that data. And then collectively, they have a peer review committee within that incorporates EMS as part of the center's data. And then move upstream, Wake's a fairly large organization. And so they have divided out tasks to those who can be consistent with collecting the information in a consistent way to deliver the information back down. Now, cardiac arrest in particular, you have so many players. And you said it's a team sport. It's a huge team sport for us. We've got 2 ambulances, an engine company, police officer, an advanced practice paramedic, and maybe a supervisor on scene. That's a lot of people, all with tasks, necessary tasks. And then to gauge the performance, we look downstream to see what the outcomes were. And even during COVID, Wake had 130 some odd survivors from 2020, all CPC 1 or 2, which is just amazing given what the year was like.
Yeah, no, I completely understand, but I like you leveraging that excess bandwidth with your APPs or advanced practice paramedics. I think that's really useful. Kind of ties in with a different model that I've been working with some agencies to implement where we try to identify, cardiac clinical specialists, if you will, or resuscitation clinical specialists, people who are volunteering to take on some additional responsibilities and do those sorts of abstractions into the CARES registry, running the case analysis afterwards, those sorts of things. The same general idea. It's just that they're not the advanced practice paramedics necessarily. So thanks for contributing that thought, Joseph.
Sure thing.
Let's kind of continue on with some of the other comments that we've been seeing. Jim Sarak mentioned, before with some of their workflow issues, he mentions that he's a large agency. Feedback can be up to a week. So it seems to be kind of pushing the limits. But as Dr. Jarvis mentioned, getting some feedback is better than no feedback. And sometimes even just getting the feedback in form of the aggregate data will be helpful. But Jim also brings up the point that sometimes it's difficult to close the loop on some of these tools when we have to have the issue of getting the hospital outcomes in when we're entering our CARES registry. So point well taken. Stephanie in the comments mentioned, in addition to timely crew feedback, we also use process and outcome data to map training effectiveness to the Kirkpatrick model, which I'm not familiar with. Stephanie, if you could put that into the Q&A box, I can bring you up here to kind of elaborate on that, because I'd like to know more about perhaps what you're referring to. And I'm not. I don't know if Jeff, Tom, John, anybody else familiar with this Kirkpatrick model?
A little bit, but if Stephanie's using it, it'd be better for the attendees to hear from her.
Yeah.
Hey, Mick,
So-
while we're waiting for her to come up here, I did want to make one comment about case review and analytic feedback, and that is sometimes when a call doesn't go well. For example, we had a major system malfunction where an ambulance did not hear the emergency call, a crew got split up, the wrong unit arrived on scene first, an EMT carrying a monitor they weren't fully qualified to operate, a relatively inexperienced paramedic managing the airway, and someone that probably normally would have survived in our system did not. And the crew was absolutely dejected and demoralized and was waiting for me at the fire station to come and conduct this case review. And I realized at that moment that the last thing that they needed from me was for me to put up on the board all the things that they screwed up on this call. They knew they screwed it up. We knew they screwed it up. The system screwed up. We all screwed up. And so what we did is I just took out an instrumented mannequin and ran them through one cycle of high performance CPR, and I boosted them back up. I picked them back up and I helped them get their confidence back. And then I, just patted them all on the back and said, that was a tough one, guys, and I left. And sometimes you don't need to give them that feedback. Sometimes they need something else. Just wanted to make that point.
No, I think that's really important because, it kind of gets back to the notion of we learn sometimes a lot more from our mistakes than our successes. And I think that's true. And reflecting back on my own career and some of the cases that I knew I didn't perform as well as, it wouldn't have been particularly helpful to have my administration pointed out to me, particularly when they knew that I knew. So no, great point. So Stephanie is here with us now. Let me bring up Stephanie. So thank you for your question, Stephanie. Could you elaborate a little bit about your workflow and how you're linking the outcomes and this Kirkpatrick model? I'm not familiar with that.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm logged in from my kitchen, so I'm not turning on the camera.
Okay, that's a deal.
I am the Quality and Safety Coordinator at St. Charles County Ambulance District. We followed that MESA model for CCR pit crew. We implemented about 6 years ago. Quickly learned we needed lots of QI and data analysis. And so it was built as a training project, and QI was sort of our side hustle for that. And eventually it became the full-time hustle. And so I'm sort of a teacher in the clothes of a quality improvement person. And we use the data, because I'm still a teacher in my heart and soul. We use the data in what's called the Kirkpatrick model for training effectiveness. And it's growing. There's a couple of models for evaluating training effectiveness, but that's sort of the globally recognized industry model for sort of manufacturing and all these other things. And it's got 4 tiers. First tier is sort of the least valuable, but most readily accessible. It's the smile sheets, like the evaluations you fill out afterwards. Did you like it? Were you engaged? And it's not particularly helpful. It's helpful if it's really bad information. If everyone says they didn't like what you were doing, it's helpful. Next one is knowledge acquisition. And so you can measure that with quizzes or some sort of assessment. Next one is behavior change. That's where the process data comes in, and we can look at things like compression fraction, pauses, average rate, average depth, and those let us know, did the behavior change after? And that was one of the first quality metrics we actually came across, because we were using an aggregate data from our vendor for our monitor, and it showed that right after training, we were right in compliance with rate and depth. And then each month after, it would creep down, creep down, creep down. And we learned, hey, we need to do a refresher every 6 months, because as soon as we would get back in the classroom, refresh, go back over our choreography, we would see that process measure go right back into compliance. And then it would drift till we got back into the classroom. So it was very helpful in guiding our training curriculum, and also, sort of guiding practice. And then the highest level is often the very hardest one to get, and that's outcome, like results data. Did the things you did in training result in improved patient survivability? And we've gotten better at capturing all of that. In the beginning, it was a struggle, but things like the CARES registry and just building relationships with our hospital coordinators, we've gotten a lot faster at getting those results back to the providers. And going back to what Tom was talking about, is it really helps close that sort of, that soul gap that we have in EMS, where, we spend 30 really intense minutes with a patient and their family and then nothing. And so, as leaders, it was really helpful for them to bring those victories back, and people started engaging in their jobs more. Burnout dropped a little bit. We started seeing improvement in morale after we were showing them all these victories we had. So anyway, that's the Kirkpatrick model, those 4 levels. And we map our resus data to training to help us guide training practice as well.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Stephanie. I appreciate your efforts. And I like the integration of education and QI, because I've always looked at education as an improvement intervention. An educational exercise is a hypothesis that I believe that doing this class will result in an improvement, and it needs to be measured and evaluated that way. So thank you for doing that.
Dude, same. That's like, every time someone says education is not an intervention in my improvement science stuff, I'm like, wait, what? Yes, I love education.
All right. Well, I think you have a lot of kindred spirits here. All right. So we are about at time. I see a big smile on John's face. And everybody's. So good to have everyone in this session. This is going to wrap it up for the day. Almost. We are going to have our reception after this. We've been struggling to get people to participate in the lounge and going to the booth. So I'm going to try to admonish everybody to give it a try. Come into the lounge, try it out, just try it, okay? And join us there. And I'm not going to wait until the last 30 minutes to do it. Let's kind of huddle up for maybe 5-10 minutes, and we'll start the speed networking a little bit sooner than later, and just kind of let that run its course, because that's a feature that I think could be really fun to use, meet a lot of the other people at the conference. So we're going to wrap this up, and please join us in the lounge, mingle around a little bit at the tables, get used to how the tables work a little bit. And then I'll start the speed networking session very shortly after we get over there. Thanks everybody for being here today.